She lifted a slim cream envelope from beneath her napkin and slid it gently across the table toward her husband. "Happy 20th anniversary, Jonas." Dahlia's eyes were soft, almost apologetic, as she watched him reach for it. "You've been sneaking around all week," he teased. "Planning something? What is it this time?" "Go ahead," Dahlia said quietly. "Open it." The string quartet kept playing in the background, oblivious. 40 guests sat scattered around the rooftop, kitchen staff in their pressed whites. Jonas's mother Bonnie at the head table, old friends who'd watched this restaurant get built from a food truck into an empire. Jonas untied the ribbon, laughing. "If this is a fake reservation to some island I can't pronounce." His voice caught. The first page read, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." His hands went still. The quartet kept playing, but Jonas no longer heard it. He looked up at his wife of 20 years, waiting for the punchline. Dahlia didn't smile. She didn't blink. She simply folded her hands on the table and said nothing at all. "This a joke, right?" Jonas asked, forcing a laugh that nobody around the table returned. Bonnie, seated 3 chairs down, set her wine glass down without a sound. Her eyes fixed on her son, not with confusion, with dread. She'd known something the rest of the table hadn't. "Dahlia," Jonas's voice cracked slightly. "Talk to me." "Not yet," she said softly. "Just eat your dinner, Jonas. Please." Guests exchanged uneasy glances. A waiter near the kitchen door, one of Jonas's own line cooks, quietly stepped back into the shadows, phone lowering by his side. Jonas set the papers down like they might burn him. 20 years, he said. "And this is what you give me? Tonight? In front of everyone?" Dahlia's chin trembled. "Just once." "I need you to sign them," she whispered, "before dessert." The quartet reached the final bar of the song and stopped. For the first time all evening, the rooftop went completely, unbearably silent. If this is your first time on this channel, subscribe right now. It won't take you a second. Thank you for supporting me and showing love. Jonas turned the envelope over twice before opening it, as if the answer might be printed on the back. The paper was thick, expensive. The kind Dahlia used for wedding invitations and thank you notes, not the kind he associated with anything cold. That was the first thing that confused him. She'd chosen beautiful stationery to deliver something so brutal. He almost said something about that, almost made a joke about her taste, but the look on her face stopped him. He read the words twice, certain he was misreading them. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Below it, a case number. Below that, both their full legal names typed in a font, too formal for anything that had ever existed between them. He set the paper down gently, like it might tear if he wasn't careful, though some part of him understood it was already too late for gentleness. Around them, the party continued in its own oblivious rhythm. A cork popped 2 tables over. Someone's laugh rang out too loud, too far away to belong to this moment. Bonnie hadn't touched her food. Jonah, Dahlia's brother, had gone very still near the bar, watching them both with the expression of a man who already knew how this scene ended and hated that he couldn't stop it. Jonas looked up at his wife. 20 years of her face, and he still couldn't read what was behind her eyes tonight. Not anger, not the flat, exhausted look of someone who'd finally had enough. Something gentler, and somehow worse. "Talk to me," he said again, quieter this time, like the volume itself might undo what he'd just read. Dahlia reached across the table and closed her hand over his, the way she had 100 anniversaries before this one. "I will," she said. "Tonight. I promise you that." "Then why not now? Why do this here? Like this, in front of—" He gestured vaguely at the rooftop, the string lights, the 40 people who loved them both, and had no idea what they were witnessing. "Because I needed you surrounded by people who love you," she said, "when I tell you the rest." It wasn't an answer. It was worse than an answer. It was a warning, dressed up as comfort. Jonas felt something drop low in his chest, heavier than anger, closer to fear. He looked down at the papers again, at her signature already dried in blue ink at the bottom of the last page, and understood, for the first time all evening, that whatever was coming next was not about him leaving her. It was about something leaving them both. Jonas stood, chair scraping against the concrete loud enough to turn heads 2 tables away. He hadn't meant to make a scene, but his body had reacted before his mind caught up. Some old instinct to stand when the ground shifted under him. The quartet faltered mid-phrase, the cellist glancing toward the head table, unsure whether to keep playing through whatever this was. "No," Jonas said. "You don't get to say that, and then just sit there. 20 years, Dahlia. You don't hand me this and tell me to enjoy my dinner." A hush moved outward from their table, like a stone dropped in water. Conversations died mid-sentence. Somewhere behind him, a fork clinked against a plate and stopped. Jonas was aware, distantly, of all the eyes now on them. Cousins, line cooks, the sommelier who'd worked every anniversary they'd thrown since the restaurant opened. But he couldn't make himself care. Not tonight. "Sit down," Dahlia said, so softly it was almost lost under the string lights humming overhead. "Please, tell me what this is." "I will." Her voice didn't rise to meet his. If anything, it dropped further, forcing him to lean in just to hear her, forcing the anger out of his own volume, simply to catch her words. "You'll understand everything by the end of the night. I need you to trust me for a few more hours. That's all I'm asking. A few more hours," he repeated, like the phrase itself was an insult. "You want me to sit through dessert and toasts, pretending I didn't just read what I read. I want you to let me do this the way I planned it," she said. "Please, Jonas, not like this, not with everyone staring." He almost laughed at that. Everyone was already staring, had been since the moment he opened the envelope, but something in her face stopped him. Not fear exactly. Resolve, worn thin at the edges. His eyes moved past her to his mother. Bonnie hadn't said a word since the papers appeared, hadn't reached for her wine again, hadn't done anything but watch the two of them with an expression Jonas had only seen once before, the night his father died. A kind of terrible, tender patience, the look of someone bracing to carry news she didn't want to deliver. "Mom." His voice cracked on the single syllable. "Do you know what this is?" Bonnie's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at Dahlia, some silent exchange passing between them that Jonas wasn't invited into, and for a moment he understood, with a cold certainty that settled somewhere beneath his ribs, that everyone at this table might know more about his own marriage than he did. He sat back down slowly, the papers still open in front of him, and said nothing else. The quartet, after a long pause, began to play again, softer now, uncertain, filling a silence that no longer belonged to music at all. A man Jonas didn't recognize approached the table just as the servers began clearing the salad plates. He wore a blazer instead of a suit, no briefcase, nothing that matched the lawyer Jonas had been bracing himself for since he'd read the word petition. The man crouched slightly beside Dahlia's chair, said something low that Jonas couldn't hear, and she nodded, her hand finding his forearm briefly, the gesture of two people who knew each other well. "Jonas," Dahlia said, "this is Romeo." "Romeo," Jonas repeated the name flatly, searching his memory for it. Some cousin of hers, a family friend, anything. Nothing surfaced. "Your lawyer." "No," the man said gently, and something about the gentleness itself felt like a warning. "I'm not a lawyer." He held out an envelope, smaller than the first, sealed with actual wax, the way Dahlia used to seal invitations back when they were young and had time for things like that. Jonas took it without meaning to, his hand moving before his mind agreed. "She asked me to give this to you tonight," Romeo said. "If it came to that." "If what came to that?" Romeo didn't answer. He looked at Dahlia instead, some silent permission passing between them, and then he stepped back into the crowd of guests without another word, leaving Jonas holding a letter and a question that no one at the table seemed willing to answer. He broke the wax seal carefully, aware of Bonnie watching him now with the same stillness she'd worn all evening, aware of Dahlia's eyes fixed somewhere on the tablecloth, unable to meet his. The handwriting was hers, unmistakably, The same slanted script that had signed 20 years of birthday cards and grocery lists and notes left on his pillow before early shifts at the restaurant. But the date at the top stopped him cold. 6 weeks ago. She had written this 6 weeks ago, folded it, sealed it, and carried it in silence through 6 weeks of ordinary dinners and ordinary mornings, waiting for a night like this one. The letter itself said almost nothing. "My love," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I ran out of ways to tell you gently, and I'm sorry for that. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Whatever you're feeling right now, whatever you're about to say to me in front of everyone we love, please wait. Just a little longer. I promise you'll understand." That was all. No explanation, no confession, no reason. Jonas looked up at his wife, and for the first time all night, felt something colder than anger settle into his chest. Fear. Jonas found Jonah near the bar, half hidden behind a pillar, strung with fairy lights, nursing a drink he hadn't touched in several minutes. He'd known his brother-in-law 15 years, long enough to read the particular stillness in his shoulders, the way a man stands when he's trying very hard to look like he isn't hiding anything. "You know," Jonas said, not a question. Jonah didn't turn around right away. "Know what? Don't do that. Don't stand there and pretend you don't know exactly what I'm asking." Jonas kept his voice low, aware of guests drifting past them toward the dessert table, aware that the whole rooftop was one wrong word away from becoming a spectacle. Is she seeing someone? Is that what this is? Some affair I was too stupid to notice? Jonah's jaw tightened. It's not that. Then what? Money. Did I miss something in the books? Is the restaurant going under and nobody told me? Jonas, tell me something. Anything. Because right now I'm sitting here inventing worse and worse versions of my own marriage, and every single one of them is easier than whatever nobody in this family is willing to say to my face. Jonah set his glass down on the narrow ledge behind him, hands not quite steady. He glanced toward the head table, toward his sister, as if hoping she might materialize and take this decision out of his hands. She didn't. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to something Jonas had never heard from him before, thin and worn through. "She's been going somewhere," Jonah said. 2, 3 times a week, for months now. Appointments. She made me swear not to say anything. Made Mum swear too. Appointments. Jonas repeated the word, like it might explain itself if he said it enough times. What kind of appointments? I don't know exactly. She never let me come with her. Never let anyone come with her. Jonah exhaled hard, rubbing a hand across his mouth. But she stopped eating the way she used to. Started wearing scarves, even when it wasn't cold. And she cries in the car sometimes. After. Thinks nobody notices. But I've picked her up twice now. The music from the quartet felt very far away suddenly. The lights too bright. The whole rooftop tilting slightly beneath Jonas's feet. He thought of the letter, folded in his jacket pocket. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Why wouldn't she just tell me? Jonas said, more to himself than to Jonah. Jonah looked at him then, and for the first time all night, his composure cracked entirely. Because she's terrified of what happens to you, he said, once you know. Jonas walked back to the table, like a man crossing unfamiliar ground, each step deliberate, careful, as though the rooftop might give way beneath him. Dahlia watched him approach, and whatever she saw in his face made her stand before he even reached his chair. You talked to Jonah, she said quietly. Tell me the rest. His voice had lost its edge entirely now, worn down to something flat and pleading. No more letters, no more waiting for the end of the night. Tell me right now. Dahlia glanced at Romeo, who had drifted back toward their table, and now gave the smallest nod, as if to say it's time. She reached into her clutch and withdrew a third envelope, thicker than the others, and set it in front of Jonas, with hands that trembled for the first time all evening.
I wanted to say it out loud,
she said.
I practiced it in the mirror for weeks, but every time I tried, I couldn't get past your face.
So I wrote it instead. I'm sorry. I know that's a coward's way. Jonas opened it slowly. Inside were folded papers, official ones this time, hospital letterhead, insurance statements, a summary page dense with numbers he didn't understand. Near the top, a string of letters and digits sat beside the words, pathology report. He didn't recognize the code, so he did the only thing his mind would let him do. He pulled out his phone under the table and typed it in, hands unsteady, the blue light of the screen the only thing he could focus on. The search results loaded. He read the first line twice before it made any sense. Oh, stage 4. He kept scrolling, some desperate hope pulling him further down the page, looking for a different word, a softer word. Instead, he found the one Dahlia herself had never once said to him in 20 years of marriage, the one that finally explained every closed door, every quiet appointment, every scarf worn in July. Terminal. The phone slipped from his hand and landed silently against the tablecloth. Around them, the party had gone on oblivious, laughter rising from some far table, glasses clinking, the quartet still playing something soft and unbothered. But at their table, the sound had drained out of the world entirely. Jonas looked up at his wife, his mother's stricken face beside her, and understood, all at once, why Bonnie had known, why Jonah had broken, why Dahlia had chosen tonight, of all nights, surrounded by everyone who loved them, to finally let the truth reach him. "Diolia," he whispered, and it was the only word he had left. She reached for his hand across the table, and this time, he didn't pull away. Dahlia held his hand across the table and let the silence stretch until she was ready to fill it. When she finally spoke, her voice was steadier than Jonas expected, like she'd rehearsed this part more than any other. "I need you to understand something," she said. "The papers were never about leaving you. I need you to hear that before anything else." "Then what were they about?" His voice cracked on the last word. "Because from where I'm sitting, you handed me divorce papers on our anniversary and let me spend 2 hours thinking you'd fallen out of love with me. I know." Her eyes filled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "I know how it looked. I'm sorry for that. I didn't know how else to get you to actually listen, instead of promising me you'd be fine and changing the subject the way you do every time I try to talk about what happens after. After I'm gone." She said it plainly now, without flinching, as though saying it out loud for the first time was its own small mercy. "The treatments aren't cheap, Jonas. You know that. You've seen the statements, and they're not going to work. Romeo's been honest with me about that from the beginning, even when I wasn't ready to be honest with you. What's coming isn't a fight I win. It's debt. Hospital debt. On top of what we already owe on the restaurant. And when I'm gone, all of it becomes yours. Not because you chose it. Because the law doesn't ask you." Jonas shook his head slowly, like he could refuse the logic simply by refusing to nod along with it. "I filed the papers so that wouldn't happen to you," Dahlia continued. "So you'd have the restaurant free and clear. No name attached but yours. No debts you didn't agree to. I wanted you to build the next 20 years without me chained to your ankle, like a burden you can't legally escape." "A burden?" Jonas's voice rose, sharp enough that a few nearby guests glanced over before looking away, embarrassed. 20 years, Dahlia, and you thought the kindest thing you could do for me was disappear from my life on paper before you disappeared from it for real. "I thought it was love," she whispered. "I still think it might have been, in its own broken way." "It wasn't love," Jonas said. "It was you making a decision about my life without asking me what I wanted." Dahlia's composure finally cracked, one tear slipping free before she caught it with the back of her hand. "Then tell me," she said. "Tell me what you want, Jonas, because I've spent 6 weeks assuming I already knew." He looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had built an empire beside him, and tried, in her own terrified way, to protect him from the wreckage of losing her. "I want you," he said, "however long that is." Just before I continue, if you are enjoying this story, like this video and comment where you are watching from. Let's continue. Jonas stood, and this time the chair didn't scrape so much as fall silent beneath him. The whole rooftop, already turned toward their table, in a way it hadn't been since the first envelope appeared. He picked up the papers, the ones that had sat between them for 2 hours, like a wound neither of them could close, and held them in both hands. "Everyone keeps looking at me like I'm the one who needs protecting tonight," he said, loud enough now that he wasn't hiding it anymore, wasn't trying to keep this contained to their table. "Like I'm fragile. Like the kindest thing anyone could do is keep me in the dark until it's easier to explain." He looked down at Dahlia, at the tears she was no longer bothering to catch. "I've spent 20 years building something with you. This restaurant, this family. Every version of my life I actually wanted. And you thought the way to protect that was to erase yourself from it before you had to hand me a version of the future where I never had to carry anything hard." His hands tightened on the papers. "I don't want that future. I never asked for it, and I am done letting people decide what I can and can't survive on my behalf." He tore the papers once, straight down the middle, the sound sharper than he expected in the quiet that had swallowed the rooftop. Then again and again, until what was left was nothing but scraps scattered across the white tablecloth, like confetti nobody had asked for. A few guests gasped. Somewhere behind him, someone started to clap, uncertain at first, then joined by another and another, until the sound rolled outward across the rooftop, like something alive. Bonnie was crying openly now, one hand pressed to her mouth. Jonah had come up beside her, his own eyes wet, gripping the back of her chair. Jonas knelt down in front of Dahlia, right there on the concrete in his good suit, and took both her hands in his. "I'm not signing anything," he said. "Not now, not when it gets harder, not ever. Whatever this is, whatever's coming, I'm not doing it from outside your life. I'm doing it beside you, the way I've done everything else for 20 years. Dahlia let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, disbelieving and grateful all at once. "You're going to regret tearing up perfectly legal paperwork," she managed. "Sue me," Jonas said, and for the first time all night, she actually laughed. He pulled her up out of her chair and into him, and the applause around them grew louder, warmer, guests rising from their seats without quite knowing why, except that something had just been decided, something stronger than the fear that had been sitting at that table all evening. The quartet began to play again. This time, no one in the room mistook the silence that followed for anything but relief. Jonas didn't let go of her hands. He stayed there, kneeling on the concrete among the torn scraps of paper, and looked up at his wife, like it was 20 years ago again, like the whole rooftop had folded back into that first night he'd asked her to marry him behind a food truck, with no chairs, and no string lights, and no guarantee any of this would ever exist. "I know this isn't how tonight was supposed to go," he said, and his voice carried now, steady enough to reach every table. "I know somewhere there's a version of this anniversary, with a cake and a toast, and neither of us crying into the appetizers. But I don't want that version anymore. I want this one." Dahlia shook her head, laughing through the tears, one hand pressed against her mouth, like she could hold herself together with it. "I already married you once," Jonas said, "for better or worse, in sickness and in health. I said those words 20 years ago, and I meant them, but I don't think I understood them yet, not really, not until tonight." He looked past her, toward Bonnie, toward the guests standing frozen at their tables, toward Jonah, with his arm around his mother's shoulders. "I want to say them again, here, with everyone who loves us watching, because I don't want there to be any confusion, not this time, about what I'm choosing." He turned back to Dahlia. "I'm not promising you forever," he said. "Nobody gets to promise that, and I'm done pretending we're any different. But I'm promising you every day I get, however many there are, however hard they get. I'm not signing anything that takes me out of this, and I'm not letting you sign anything either." He drew a slow breath. "For whatever time we have, that's my vow now. Not the one from 20 years ago, this one." Bonnie was openly sobbing, no longer trying to hide it, and beside her, Jonah lifted his glass without a word, the gesture rippling outward until half the rooftop had done the same, glasses raised toward a couple who had come to this dinner expecting an ending and found something else instead. Dahlia sank down onto her knees in front of him, ignoring the mess of torn paper, ignoring the dress, ignoring everything but his face in front of hers. "For whatever time we have," she repeated, the words breaking apart and reforming as she said them. "I never wanted anything else. I was just too scared to ask for it." "You don't have to be scared anymore," Jonas said. "Not with me." The quartet, without anyone asking, began to play the same song from their wedding, 20 years worn, but unmistakable, and around them, the rooftop rose to its feet, in something that wasn't quite applause, and wasn't quite grief, but held both at once. Months later, the kitchen smelled the way it always had, garlic and butter, and the particular sweetness of caramelizing onions, but Dahlia moved through it differently now, slower, one hand resting on the steel counter for balance she didn't used to need. She'd lost weight, the scarves couldn't quite hide anymore, and her voice had thinned at the edges, but her eyes, when she looked around at the staff gathered near the pass, were exactly as sharp as they'd always been. "Watch her hands, not mine," Jonas said to the two new line cooks standing closest, nodding toward his wife. "She taught me half of what I know. The other half, she just let me think I figured out on my own." Dahlia swatted his arm, without looking up from the cutting board, and a few of the staff laughed, the sound easy in a way it hadn't been for a long time. She was working slowly, deliberately, walking a young cook named Priya through the reduction that had anchored the restaurant's signature dish since the food truck days, the one nobody but Dahlia had ever gotten quite right, not even Jonas, not in 20 years of trying. "It's not about the recipe," Dahlia said, her voice quieter than it used to carry across a kitchen, so that Priya leaned in to hear her. "Recipes are just instructions. What matters is knowing when it's ready without needing the clock to tell you. You'll feel it before you see it." Jonas watched her from across the station, spatula forgotten in his hand, and felt the same quiet ache he'd carried for months now. Not quite grief, not yet, but its shape already forming somewhere beneath the gratitude. Romeo had been honest with them both, the way he always was. There was no telling how much time remained. Weeks that felt like months, some days. Months that felt like borrowed time, others. But Dahlia had insisted on this, closing the dining room for 2 hours every week, gathering whoever could be spared from the floor, and teaching them everything she knew before she no longer could. Not because she believed the restaurant needed saving, because she wanted it to keep tasting like both of them, long after only one of them was left to taste it. "When I'm not here," she said to the small circle of staff, and nobody flinched at the words anymore. They'd all had months to get used to hearing her say them plainly. "I want people to eat something I made, and not even know it. That's the only kind of forever anybody actually gets." Jonas crossed the kitchen and stood behind her, his hands settling over hers on the counter, steadying the knife she still insisted on holding herself. Together they finished the cut, the two of them moving in the same rhythm they'd shared since the beginning, and for a moment, the whole kitchen seemed to hold its breath around them. "Whatever happens," Jonas said quietly, "just for her, this stays ours." Dahlia leaned back into him and did not answer, because for once, she didn't need to.